In 1979, the sci-fi horror film Alien was released. It was initially a limited release that hit theaters on May 25th, but was later expanded to a wide release where it dominated the box office. While audiences loved the film, critics were mixed. Siskel and Ebert originally gave the film a positive review.
Alien, the R-rated science fiction thriller with the creepiest monster in years, also got 2 yes votes.
However, they later went on to dismiss it in their Invasion of the Outer Space movie special from 1980.
But then after those 2 films in '77, things did not necessarily go on to get any better. Last year, for example, we got a whole lot of strictly routine science fiction movies that looked fancy and had big budgets, but that really didn't have any more imagination than the old tried and true space operas of the 1950s. One of them was Alien, which was basically just an intergalactic haunted house thriller set inside a spaceship. It seems to me that those 3 films, 2001, Close Encounters, and Star Wars, have really changed the rules of the game, because before that and back in the 50s, you could have movies that were essentially schlock, and you could go to them and you could enjoy them, and even now we enjoy them on creature features on The Late Show. But now it seems to me the ante has been upped, and you've got to have a movie that gives you a great deal more, both in special effects and in imagination, or we're just going to be disappointed as we were by last year's crop of science fiction.
Ebert revisited the film in 2003, this time giving it 4 stars and adding it to his great movies list, saying, "It vibrates with a dark and frightening intensity." Alien was internationally the 2nd highest grossing film of 1979 and won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. Even though it was financially successful, 20th Century Fox tried to claim it actually lost the studio $2 million. Fox co-produced the movie with Brandywine Productions, and by claiming the film was taking a loss, they didn't have to pay out any of the profits to Brandywine. Recognizing what they had, Brandywine wanted to make a sequel, but with Fox calling this a loss, they said it wasn't financially viable. Fox had just changed ownership, and the new owners had no interest in making a sequel to a movie that lost them money. The budget for the film was an estimated $9 to $11 million, and the estimated box office was close to $150 million, with some saying it went as high as $200 million. Brandywine was not happy. Industry accountants were calling BS and demanded this be looked into. Fox did a recount, and by using more creative accounting, they said the film made a small profit of $4 million. They stuck with their decision to not make a sequel. In 1980, Brandywine sued 20th Century Fox over their earnings and wanted to open their accounting records to get their money and prove their returns warranted a sequel. During this time, other studios saw the potential for making films to capitalize on the success of Alien. Roger Corman's New World Pictures already made a very successful Star Wars knockoff, Battle Beyond the Stars, and now wanted to make an Alien knockoff. Back in the late 60s, Corman hired New Zealand-born Bruce Clark to direct a bikersploitation film called Naked Angels, which was very successful. It was now 1980, and Clark was working in Europe. He called Corman to see if he had anything for him, and he was offered the job to direct this yet unnamed, unwritten Alien knockoff. Clark brought in his friend Mark Siegler, who wrote Naked Angels, to help write the script. The duo decided that they wanted to go in a more psychological direction with this sci-fi horror film, instead of just an Alien knockoff. They came up with an idea that the horrors in the film would be the fears of the characters. For each one, they would have a unique monster that was the person's greatest fear. They called it Planet of Horrors. To compete with the larger exploitation films the studios were making, Corman increased the budget on his films. Planet of Horrors was going to cost around $700,000 to $1 million. With the foundation in place, they started casting. There was a problem. They put out the call, but weren't getting very many applicants. As it turned out, no one wanted to audition for a movie called Planet of Horrors. Corman said they needed to change the title. At the time, a young David Dakota was working as a production assistant, his first job in Hollywood. He suggested changing the title to Quest, which was the name of the ship. Corman liked it, so they put out new audition requests for Quest, and more people showed up. In the 70s, a young Robert Englund was doing horror films like Eaten Alive and TV shows like Policewoman. One day he announced he was moving to LA to do Corman films, which was what he did. He moved to LA and got the job working on Quest. Corman sent a copy of Quest out to actor Sid Haig. Haig loved it and called Corman about the role. He said he wanted to do it, but on one condition. Corman responded, "You ain't getting any more money." Haig laughed and said that no, he didn't want more money. He wanted to be able to play the character mute. He felt the written dialogue didn't match how he envisioned the character. Corman agreed, as well as the director, so Haig signed on. Clark knew actor Zalman King from UCLA and hired him for the film. After filming The Empire Strikes Back, actor Mark Hamill expressed interest in doing a horror film. They tried to get him on board for this one, but for one reason or another, they couldn't get him. Actress Taffy O'Connell auditioned for the film. She was a huge fan of Roger Corman, and liked that the role was not your typical hooker or housewife. At the time, she was doing wholesome stuff, like Blansky's Beauties and Happy Days, so she welcomed the departure. After discovering there would be nudity, her agent was against it, but she agreed to do it. It was an unusual scene she had signed on for. A giant space maggot was going to strip her naked and eat her. Rounding out the rest of the cast was Grace Zabriskie, Eddie Albert, my favorite Martian star Ray Walston, Bernard Behrens, and Happy Days star Aaron Moran. The film was set to be shot in the Corman Studios, located in an old lumber yard. In the 70s, Corman had purchased the Hammond Lumber Yard in Venice, Los Angeles, California. While the location was no longer a lumber yard, they kept the lumberyard signs up and made sure from an outward appearance that it was nothing more than that. This way they could hide the productions that were going on. Fanatics and equipment thieves would sneak onto a film studio. No one would bother sneaking into a lumberyard. In the late 70s, visual effects designer Alec Gillis went to apply at Corman Studios to work on Battle Beyond the Stars. Thinking he'd have a better chance of being hired if he came with a friend, he showed up with his buddy, who had very little film experience. James Cameron. Cameron was a college dropout who was working as a truck driver while writing scripts in his free time. In 1978, Cameron wrote, produced, directed, and did the production design for a short called Xenogenesis. He was able to get the funding for the short from a group of dentists looking to invest in a film as a quick tax write-off. Cameron wanted the ability to showcase his skills and hopefully gain enough traction to be able to turn this into a feature-length production. He shopped it around, and even though it was very groundbreaking at the time, no one was interested. Chuck Comiskey, the production coordinator for Jason of Star Command, saw Xenogenesis and was so impressed he hired him for Battle Beyond the Stars. Cameron and Gillis worked on miniature design and other facets of production. Cameron worked insanely hard and quickly rose up the ranks. While he started designing the miniatures, he moved all the way up to the additional director of photography. Two very talented guys they were working with on the movie were Dennis and Robert Skotek, or the Skotek brothers. Battle Beyond the Stars was a huge hit, and Corman brought them all back for Quest. A recurring thing that started recently with Corman's sci-fi films was to use painted McDonald's styrofoam containers for textures on the spaceship interiors. They had crew members dumpster diving in McDonald's every day and brought back as many containers as they could. Many of the props, miniatures, and other items used in production were made out of trash. They brought in hunks of plastic, TV parts, and integrated them in a way to make them look like parts of the ship or the environment. You'd be surprised at how often some of your favorite low-budget films do this. Always looking for a new way to help with the production funding, Corman rented out the hallway sets to a German watch company so they could film a futuristic-style commercial there. There was a rumor that the money he received from this covered most of the budget. For the director of photography, they brought back Jacques Heitken, who had just shot Private Eyes with Don Knotts and Tim Conway. This was Corman's biggest hit up to this point, grossing almost $19 million. They also hired Tony Randall for visual effects, who also worked on Battle Beyond the Stars. While working on the film, Cameron met a young carpenter who was building the sets named Bill Paxton. Paxton was trying to get into acting, but only landed a few small roles in movies like Stripes and Crazy Mama. He was getting most of his work in labor. Cameron and Paxton hit it off and worked very well together. Paxton kept asking to act in the film. He did eventually audition, but didn't get the part. Cameron put in tons of work for Battle Beyond the Stars, but worked even harder on Quest. He was originally hired as an assistant in the special effects department. Then he became the head of the special effects department. Then production designer. Then the head of production design. Then second unit director. He was handling so much of the film when Corman showed up on set, he'd almost always go to Jim's office. Now with a larger role in Quest, Cameron wanted to use elements from Xenogenesis here. One day David Koda was answering phones and he got a call for James Cameron. He paged him, but he didn't come. So he waited a few minutes and paged him again. Cameron stormed down the hallway into the office and said, "If I don't answer that fucking phone the first time, I'm not going to answer it a second time. Do not page me twice." He was seen as a hothead on set, but he clearly was an effective leader. He was also a workaholic. Every day he was the first one there and the last one to leave. As filming went on, it became clear this production was Jim's show. His involvement was far beyond what he was hired for. As time went on, they put more into the film. and it was rumored the budget was getting closer to $2 million. This was becoming a practical effects heavy production, and even though this was still a low-budget movie, because of the talent involved, it was looking way more expensive. Robert Skotak and James Cameron designed the alien pyramid. They filmed the miniature and displayed the footage on a front projector they had from Battle Beyond the Stars. They had the cast stand on this pile of rubble while the camera panned up to make it look like they were standing in front of this massive structure. They designed the backpacks for the team to wear with the floodlights. The backpacks were made to conceal the giant batteries needed to fuel the lights, but it came at a price. The packs each weighed about 40 pounds. This made them sag, and sometimes the actors fell off balance. The packs kept falling off, so they used some extra lines to tie them to the costumes they were wearing to keep them on their backs. The uniforms were reused leftovers from the recently canceled show Battlestar Galactica, which in and of itself was a Star Wars knockoff. They had a different death plan for Grace Zabriskie, but it was deemed too expensive, so they just killed her character by lighting her on fire. In one scene, a character gets killed by getting their guts ripped open. For the intestines, they didn't have the time and money to design them, so they bought real animal intestines at the local Mexican market. For the endless fall, they threw a G.I. Joe figure over a ledge and filmed it at 300 frames per second. Also, since this was an alien knockoff, the Shadow Demon looks suspiciously like a xenomorph. They need to create an effect for a regular maggot to grow huge. The Skotek brothers designed a hand puppet, and then used a method taken from Alice in Wonderland. They dolly into the puppet, giving it the appearance of growing. This was a simple yet effective way of doing it that cost very little money. They wanted to establish the character's fear of the insects. For this, they had a prop arm covered in maggots. They couldn't get them to move, so Cameron came up with the idea to hook a battery up to the arm, and whenever they started rolling, he ran current into the prop, which made the maggots move around. Simple and disgusting, but it was another example of his on-the-fly problem-solving skills. There were some external producers on set that day who were astonished at Cameron's talents. When he said action, they turned on the power to make the maggots move, and when he said cut, they turned it off. This made it look like the maggots were taking his direction. Corman had a meeting with the writer and told him that he promised the investors there was gonna be a rape in the film. This was not something Siegler was happy with. He spoke to Clark and they weighed their options. They wanted to walk off their production, but the problem was, they'd already uprooted and moved to LA for the film, and couldn't afford to just up and quit. They discussed what to do and decided that instead of Taffy being eaten by the space maggot, she would be raped by it. The idea was that this was so ridiculously over the top that it couldn't be taken seriously. They informed Taffy's agent of the change, and he told her to immediately go to her dressing room. The agent spoke with her and tried to talk her out of it, but she decided it might be fun to do, so she went with it. For a few more bucks, that is. The giant maggot was initially too big, so they had to cut the body and resew it to be leaner. It was still an enormous prop. It stood 18 feet high and was about 5 feet wide. They built it on a gimbal, along with a crane and dolly to move it around. Aluminum was too expensive, so they had to build the frame with steel, which made it much heavier. It weighed over a ton and took multiple people to control. They had the body attached to chains in order to move the upper parts. Inside the monster, Gillis was the puppeteer. Since it was so bulky, they had cables inside to move the tentacles, but in some cases, they just had the actress wrap the tentacles around her and act like it was crushing her, much like what Bela Lugosi did in Ed Wood's Bride of the Monster. When it came time to do the maggot sequence, they had Taffy lay on the floor and they wheeled the monster over her. Whoever built the floor didn't make it structurally sound, and due to the weight of the monster, one of the wheels broke through the floor. Someone yelled, "Roll!" and the actress rolled as fast as she could out from under the monster, which came crashing down where she was just laying. If she didn't roll, she most likely would have been killed. Cameron went off on the construction crew because the floor was supposed to be 2-ton rated. They fixed the floor and Taffy crawled back under without hesitation. She said she must have made someone on set mad because the KY jelly they were using for the slime was freezing cold. She said her screams were not because she was terrified, but because of how cold the slime was. Clark didn't want to film the scenes, so Corman came in those days to do it. Although Taffy did do the nudity she signed up for, Corman added in some additional nudity with a body double. The maggot scene took a while to do. At one point, during a break, Taffy was on the phone with her boyfriend at the time. They called her back to the set, and she said, "I gotta go get poked by the third end of my 1-ton maggot." Despite it being an unpleasant experience, she said overall it was fun, and she didn't regret doing it. She was also thankful they warmed up the maggot goo for her second filming. The designers called the giant space maggot Maggie the Maggot on set. It was also more quietly called Cameron's Beast, for obvious reasons. When not filming, Ray Walston would ride his bicycle around the lumberyard. Haig was happy with his role in the film, but the director did force him to say this one line.
I live and I die by the crystals.
Filming ran during the summer for 3 6-day weeks. They moved into post but had to do some reshoots. A month and a half after Principal, they did some additional filming, including the death sequence for Erin Moran. Moran had originally signed on to do nudity, but renegotiated that instead, she would have a much more violent death. After filming, they came back to reshoot a scene where she was crushed with wires and her head exploded. The effects team filled a prosthetic head with cans of Dinty Moore beef stew. Although some said it wasn't stew, it was chili. After filming, they changed the name of the production from Quest to Mind Warp, an Infinity of Terror. They sent it off for a rating, and not surprisingly, it got an X for the maggot rape. In order for it to get an R, they had to remove most of the frames of the maggot thrusting, and the grand finale. Corman watched the film again, and wasn't happy with the film score, so they had a new score composed that was more electronic music. With the new score, they had to go back in and make a new audio mix. While doing the new mix, the audio team tweaked some things, and made some of the Foley work louder, bones cracking and such. Because of industry standards, with the new audio mix, they had to send it back in for another rating. This time it came back with an X for intensity of sound effects. The sound guys had to go back in and soften the remix audio in order to get an R. They released the film as Mind Warp, and it didn't do so well. Previews for the film were so-so. In general, critics seemed mostly either disgusted or bored. It played in a few theaters, but didn't sell. No one was seeing it. They recalled the prints, renamed the film to Galaxy of Terror, and ran a new marketing campaign. They made a new poster that had nothing to do with the movie, but looked really cool. With the new campaign, they pushed the maggot scene, which made the movie a must-see for genre enthusiasts. The movie was a hit, largely due to word of mouth getting people to see the maggot rape movie. Clark and Siegler were still uncomfortable with the maggot scene, but after the film was a success, they couldn't deny that that scene was what everyone was talking about. So while they didn't enjoy it, they admitted that Corman was right. One of the editors was discussing the scene and said that those were the days when footage that was cut was often discarded. So while the film has been restored from its original print, the X-rated cut footage is long gone and we'll never see it. A few years later, Jacques Heitkin and Robert Englund went off to work on a film that had an even lower budget than Galaxy of Terror, A Nightmare on Elm Street. Corman could see the value in Cameron, so he loaned him out to work on Android and other productions. John Carpenter came to the lumberyard to work on some insert shots for Escape from New York. Randall was the liaison between Corman Studios and Carpenter. Carpenter used Cameron as the visual effects director and also was the director of photography on the insert shots, which were comprised largely of his matte paintings. Corman and anyone who worked with him could see that Cameron was going places. Ovidio G. Asinitis was preparing a sequel to Corman's Jaws knockoff Piranha, called The Spawning. Corman suggested bringing Cameron in to direct, and he was flown to Jamaica to do the film. It was a nightmare. He wasn't involved in pre-production, and had no say in the cast or crew for the production. Most of the crew didn't even speak English. While working on the film, he did become friends with the lead star, Lance Henriksen, which was pretty much the only bright spot in this entire production. The rest of the story has two versions. Asinitis claims he fired Cameron a few weeks into the production, and he finished the film himself. Cameron claims he shot the entire thing and wasn't fired until post. Henriksen backs up Cameron's claims, saying that he did shoot the entire film and wasn't fired until they were in the editing phase. In his autobiography, Not Bad for a Human, Henriksen said, "Everything he did was about getting the movie done. The producers shortchanged him time and time again, yet he still found a way to get what he needed." Cameron was able to reclaim the film after the producer's cut was rejected by Warner Brothers. He re-edited the footage and presented his cut, which they accepted. The producers fought with Cameron over the film right up to the release date, when they finally agreed and allowed his name to be attached to the film. Saddened by the disastrous outcome of being removed from the first film he directed, and the drawn-out battle that ensued, Cameron left Corman's New World Pictures to try to make a name for himself. In 1983, the Alien lawsuit ended with an agreement between Fox and Brandywine. Fox told them they wouldn't give them any of the profits for Alien, but they would greenlight the sequel and allow them to make profits on that. Now with that out of the way, they were looking into what to do for Alien 2. At that time, Cameron had been shopping his script for The Terminator around. It was picked up by Hemdale and would be distributed by 20th Century Fox. Cameron hired his friend from Galaxy of Terror, Bill Paxton, for a small role. There's long been a rumor that Henriksen was originally cast for the role of the Terminator. Producer Gale Ann Hurd said this was true, but Henriksen denies it. He said it doesn't matter, and Arnold Schwarzenegger was the right choice. The only role he was concerned with was being Jim's friend. Cameron still put Henriksen in the film as one of the cops. Cameron was working on pre-production when an executive saw the script and thought he might be a good choice to helm Alien 2. He took 4 days and presented them with an outline which they passed on. At this time, Fox decided to delay the production on The Terminator. They weren't sure if the film would do well and thought it was a better idea to have Schwarzenegger go off and film Conan the Destroyer, the sequel to his hit Conan the Barbarian. With this extra time, Cameron was able to flesh out his ideas and wrote most of the screenplay for Alien 2. He might have finished it, but he was busy, also co-writing Rambo: First Blood Part 2. The executives liked the new script and told him if The Terminator was a hit, he could direct Alien 2. Cameron put everything he had into The Terminator. He was the writer, producer, director, and worked on the visuals with Stan Winston's FX team. For example, the Hunter Killers were miniatures based off his minis from Xenogenesis. The Terminator was released on October 26, 1984 at number 1 and went on to make $78 million on a $6 million budget. Needless to say, the executives at Fox were happy and gave the okay for Cameron to write and direct Alien 2, which was later renamed Aliens. While working on the film, Cameron used much of what he learned from Xenogenesis and Galaxy of Terror. The design for the light rigs in the backpack was designed to look more military, plus they redesigned them to be lighter. The matte paintings, the miniatures, the design for the surface of the planet, the mysteriously vacant installation. In both movies, they torch the first person they find. The structure of having the characters picked off one by one. The inside of the pyramid and the inside of the colony have a similar H.R. Giger-inspired organic look, which in a way makes sense. Since Alien was designed by Giger, Galaxy of Terror was the ripoff, and then Aliens was the continuation of Alien. The fight between the Hunter Killer and the robot was pretty much the blueprint for the Power Loader versus the Alien Queen. The crane they designed for the maggot was the foundation for the device they used to control the giant Alien Queen. I'm not saying this was ripped off from Galaxy of Terror, quite the opposite. This was a case of where Cameron smartly took what he learned there and applied it here. One of the effects guys on Galaxy of Terror was Alan A. Apone. Cameron liked the name, so he used it in Aliens. Apone was mentored by the legendary Stan Winston and created the company Makeup and Effects Laboratories, or MEL. His team's work has been seen in hundreds of movies and TV shows, like Captain America: Civil War, Django Unchained, and Westworld. Cameron brought back Paxton as one of the Marines in Aliens, his largest role to date. Paxton would go on to have a very solid career, and had a part in almost every Cameron production after this. Cameron hired the Skotek brothers to work on the effects for Aliens, and they continue to work with him on almost every one of his productions. Alec Gillis was hired to be the creature effects coordinator. He worked under Stan Winston in numerous effects-heavy films like Predator and Pumpkinhead. While working on Aliens, he met Tom Woodruff Jr., and the two later founded Amalgamated Dynamics Inc., or Studio ADI, in 1988. Cameron hired Henriksen to play the synthetic Bishop, which he stated is one of his favorite characters. Aliens went on to be the third highest grossing film of 1986, making over $183 million on a $17 million budget. Once again, Fox claimed the film lost money. James Cameron, producer Gale Ann Hurd, and the producers at Brandywine from the first film all had to sue Fox, who refused to pay them, because according to their accounting, the film lost money. It's amazing how this keeps happening, and studios keep getting away with it. On a positive note, the success for this launched Cameron into the spotlight, allowing this former truck driver to create numerous beloved films, and not one, but two of the highest grossing blockbusters in film history. However, it all goes back to Battle Beyond the Stars and Galaxy of Terror. Galaxy of Terror is an oddity. While most mainstream audiences have never even heard of it, it's filled with a cast and crew that's gone on to create some of the most beloved properties of all time. The movie, as well as many of Corman's other films, was used by the people working on it as a proving ground. They were open to experiment here, and in cases like Cameron, he was able to show just what he was capable of doing. Many of the tricks he learned here, he took with him over into his blockbusters. While it's long since mentioned that Cameron was incredibly demanding to work for, he got results. Many people said he's rough on the set, but very friendly outside of work. He's also incredibly loyal, continuing to work with many of the same actors and crew over decades. Years later at the premiere for Titanic, Corman came back to congratulate Cameron. Cameron said,
"He said, I just did what I was doing for you, but I did it bigger. I had more money."
I'm in such a weird spot about the Alien debacle. If Fox wasn't corrupt, they would have paid Brandywine what they initially owed and would have made the sequel right away. Because they didn't until the lawsuit was settled, it allowed Cameron to be able to create one of the best sci-fi movies of all time. If not for this, who knows what the original sequel would have been? It's possible it might have ended the franchise right there, which some people might say would have been for the best. It also begs the question of what would have happened to Cameron's career. Terminator was a success, and his drive would have most likely brought him to achieve greatness at some point. It just may have taken a little longer. Without doing Aliens, he would have taken his ideas and applied them to another series. That's all speculation, though. It's also strange to think that if Brandywine didn't sue, we potentially would have never had another Alien film. Galaxy of Terror is a twisted sci-fi horror film. If you're a fan of Aliens or James Cameron's work, you could see what he created here and then perfected later. Make no mistake, Galaxy of Terror was made as an Alien knockoff, complete with the lower budget, shameless moments, and gratuitous nudity. However, you can't deny the impact the film has had on cinematic history. It's a shame more people don't know about it. This little $2 million knockoff movie went on to affect the series it was ripping off, and is largely why it was able to become a billion-dollar franchise.
What's that? Whoa! A real book? No, that's okay.